The laptop screen was still open when I walked past the kitchen island, and for 1 second, one single, ordinary second, I saw her calendar notification glow blue against the dark countertop. Marcus, 7 p.m., dinner debrief. Nothing about it should have stopped me. Nothing about it did, not really. I kept walking. I got a glass of water. I told myself it was nothing, the way I'd told myself 100 small nothings over the past 3 months, each one a pebble I stepped over without looking down. My name is Daniel. I'm 39 years old. I build bridges for a living. Literally, I'm a structural engineer for a firm that does highway infrastructure across the Carolinas. And until that Tuesday in March, I would have told you my marriage was solid. Not perfect. Solid. Rachel and I had been together 11 years, married 9 of them, and we had a daughter, Emma, who was 7 and missing her front teeth and obsessed with a cartoon about a dog detective. We had a mortgage in a good school district outside Asheville. We had a life that looked, from the outside, like something people build on purpose. What I didn't know yet, what I wouldn't let myself know for another 6 weeks, was that the life I thought we'd built on purpose had a crack running through its foundation, and I was the only one who hadn't noticed it was already spreading. I closed the laptop that night. I didn't ask her about the calendar entry. I told myself I trusted her, and some small, honest part of me knew that wasn't quite the sentence. The real sentence was, I didn't want to find out I was wrong. Rachel worked as marketing director for a regional ad agency downtown, the kind of job that came with genuine late nights and genuine client dinners. So a notification like that wasn't strange on its own. What was strange, what I filed away without examining, the way you notice a draft in a house without checking the window, was how she'd started angling her phone away from me on the couch. How she'd started taking calls in the garage instead of the kitchen. How, 6 months earlier, she'd have told me about her day in long, funny, exhausting detail, and now she gave me summaries. Fine. Busy. Client stuff. I didn't ask. Not because I didn't want to know. I told myself that lie for a long time. But because some part of me had already priced out the cost of asking, and it felt higher than the cost of staying quiet. That night, I lay next to her in the dark, listening to her breathing even out into sleep, and I thought about the way she used to fall asleep with her hand flat on my chest, and how it had been weeks, maybe longer, since she'd done that. I noticed it. I let it go. That's the whole shape of what happened to us in those early days. I noticed everything and let all of it go, one piece at a time, like a man unloading a truck in the dark, setting each box down carefully without ever turning on the light to see what he was carrying. I fell asleep telling myself I'd ask her about Marcus in the morning. I didn't. Mornings in our house had a rhythm I could have drawn from memory. Emma refusing socks, Rachel's coffee cup rattling against the counter as she scrolled her phone standing up, the dog, a rescue mutt named Biscuit, doing figure eights around everyone's ankles hoping for bacon. It was loud and specific and mine, and for most of March it felt exactly the way it always had. Except, Rachel had always been a person who left her phone face up on the counter, screen unlocked half the time, utterly unbothered by the idea that I might see a text. That March, I noticed, the way you notice a single crooked picture frame in a hallway you've walked past for years, that her phone had started living face down. Not hidden, not locked away, just turned over, casually, like it was nothing. I told myself it was nothing. She'd also started going to the gym more. 4, 5 days a week, early mornings, a new gym bag I didn't remember buying her. When I mentioned it, lightly, over breakfast, look at you, getting after it, she'd laughed and said something about turning 36 and wanting to feel like herself again. I remember thinking that was a strange way to phrase it. Feel like herself again. As if some version of her had gone missing and she was out looking for it at 5 a.m. in a gym parking lot. I didn't ask who she was looking for. Somewhere in that first stretch of the story, before I understood what I was inside of, I want to stop for a second, because I think some of you already know this part. Not the affair, the part before it. The part where you're standing in your own kitchen, holding a feeling you don't have a name for yet, and you choose, deliberately, gently, to call it nothing. You've been there. Maybe you're there right now. I want you to know I understand exactly how that kitchen feels. Then the story kept moving, the way it does whether you're ready or not. Emma's school had a spring parent night in early April, and Rachel came home from work that day distracted in a way that didn't match the calendar entry. Just a client review, she'd said, nothing important. And when I asked how it went, she gave me 2 sentences and reached immediately for her phone, thumb moving fast, face doing something small and tight I couldn't quite place. I remember thinking, that's not what a boring meeting looks like on someone's face. I remember thinking it, and I remember choosing not to say it out loud. That was the first time I truly started to doubt, though I wouldn't have used that word yet. It didn't feel like doubt. It felt like static, a low hum underneath an otherwise normal evening, easy to ignore if you kept the television loud enough. 2 weeks later, I found the receipt. Not dramatic, just a gas station receipt in the cup holder of her car when I borrowed it to run to the hardware store. Time-stamped for a Tuesday afternoon, she'd told me she was working late at the office. The gas station was 40 minutes from her office, out past the interstate, near absolutely nothing Rachel had any reason to be near. I sat in the driver's seat with the receipt in my hand for a long moment, engine idling, and I felt something in my chest do a slow, deliberate turn. Not a flip, not a jolt, something heavier and quieter than that. A settling, like a house shifting on its foundation, 1 degree, somewhere you can't see. I put the receipt back in the cup holder exactly where I found it. I didn't ask her about it that night either. I told myself I was being paranoid. I told myself 40 minutes from her office could mean 100 things, a client, a supplier, a shortcut I didn't know about. Looking back now, that receipt was the first piece of hard evidence I had, and I filed it away as if it were nothing, because acknowledging it as something would have meant I had to do something about it, and I wasn't ready. Denial isn't weakness. I understand that now. It's a decision. You choose it because the alternative costs more than you're prepared to pay, and for a few more weeks, I wasn't prepared to pay it. What I didn't know, what she told me much later, in pieces, long after any of it could have changed what happened, was that April had been the month it stopped being something she could tell herself wasn't happening. I didn't know it then. This is what she was living through on her end, in her own words, when she finally told me. I told myself the first time didn't count as anything. Marcus and I had been working late on the Kessler pitch, and he made me laugh for the first time in what felt like years. Not a polite laugh, a real one, the kind that surprises you coming out. I remember thinking, driving home that night, that I hadn't felt interesting to anyone in so long that I'd forgotten what it felt like. Not wanted, interesting. Like a whole person instead of somebody's wife, somebody's mom, somebody's project manager. I told myself I was allowed to feel that once and let it go. I didn't let it go. I kept finding reasons to stay late. I told myself every single time that this was the last time I'd let myself feel that particular feeling, and every single time, it wasn't. That's what she told me, months later. I knew none of it yet, sitting in that car with a gas station receipt, choosing to believe I was being paranoid. By May, the static had become a hum I couldn't quite drown out anymore. Rachel started a new habit, angling her body away when she took calls, stepping into the garage, the bathroom, the backyard, phone pressed close, voice pitched low. I'd catch fragments through the door. Once I heard her say, I know, I just need a little more time. And when she came back inside, flushed, phone already pocketed, I asked, casually, who that was. Sarah, she said. Work drama. You know how she gets. I didn't know how Sarah got. I'd met Sarah twice in 9 years. I want to stop here for a second, because I think some of you have had this exact moment. The one where somebody hands you a lie so thin you could read a newspaper through it, and you take it anyway, because the alternative is admitting you're standing at the edge of something you can't walk back from. I took the lie. I said, tell her I said hi. I hate, even now, how easily those words came out of me. The following week, Emma asked me, out of nowhere, over mac and cheese, why Mommy had a new phone case. New phone case. I said, the blue one. It has flowers. Emma shrugged, already moving on to whether Biscuit could have a bite of her dinner. Completely unaware, she'd just handed me a piece of information that didn't fit anywhere in the story Rachel had been telling me. I'd never seen a blue phone case with flowers. I didn't ask Rachel about it. I filed it, the way I'd filed everything else, into the growing, unexamined pile of things I was choosing not to look at directly. That was a turning point, though I didn't recognize it as one at the time. Not the phone case itself, the fact that it came from Emma, 7 years old, saying something true and uncomplicated across a dinner table, while I sat there translating it in real time into something I could survive not acting on. My daughter had noticed more, in one offhand sentence, than I'd let myself admit in 6 weeks. That should have told me something about the difference between seeing and looking. It took me longer than it should have to understand that I hadn't been protecting my family by staying quiet. I'd been protecting myself from a truth I wasn't ready to hold. The gym mornings kept happening. The calendar kept filling with names I half recognized. Marcus, mostly, always framed as work. Marcus and I are finalizing the Kessler deck. Marcus wants to run creative by me before the client sees it. I'd met Marcus exactly once, at a summer office party 18 months earlier. Tall, easy laugh. The kind of guy who remembers everyone's name and asks about your kids like he means it. I remembered thinking, at the time, that Rachel seemed to genuinely like working with him. I hadn't thought anything else of it. I still didn't want to. But something in me had shifted enough by late May that I started paying attention differently. Not confronting, not accusing, just watching. I noticed she'd started working out with real intensity, not just showing up. I noticed she'd bought 2 new dresses I'd never seen her wear around me. I noticed she flinched, almost imperceptibly, when I picked up her phone off the counter to check the weather app. Flinched, and then recovered so fast I almost convinced myself I'd imagined it. I hadn't imagined it. Looking back, that flinch is the moment I'd point to now if someone asked me when I actually knew. Underneath whatever story I was still telling myself on the surface. Bodies don't lie the way voices do. Hers had already told me the truth. I just wasn't ready to translate it yet. I remember, that same week, sitting in my truck in the parking garage after work, not driving anywhere, just sitting there with my hands on the wheel, feeling something I couldn't name pressing against my chest from the inside. Even now, when I think back to that particular 10 minutes, the fluorescent lights, the smell of concrete and exhaust, my own breathing loud in the quiet cab, something uncomfortable stirs in me. That was the moment the static became a decision. I didn't decide to confront her. I decided to find out. I opened our shared cloud photo account that night, after she'd gone to sleep, not because I suspected exactly what I'd find, but because I needed to stop living inside the static. I found 3 photos, buried in a hidden album I hadn't known existed, dated back to April. Rachel and Marcus, at what looked like a rooftop bar, her hand resting on his forearm in a way that had nothing to do with client work. I didn't wake her up. I didn't say a word. I closed the laptop, sat in the dark living room until almost 3 in the morning, and made a decision that would define the next 6 weeks of my life. I wasn't going to ask her anything. I was going to find out everything, quietly, completely, before I said a single word. What followed wasn't dramatic. It was methodical, the way I approach everything. The same part of me that double-checks load calculations 3 times before signing off on a design. I didn't hire anyone. I didn't confront anyone. I started paying closer attention to patterns. Which nights she worked late. Which nights matched a calendar entry with Marcus's name on it. Which nights didn't match anything at all. I set up nothing invasive. No spyware. Nothing illegal. Nothing I couldn't stand behind later. I simply started saving things. Screenshots of calendar entries. Photos from the shared cloud album, the ones she didn't know I'd found, backed up quietly to a folder on my own laptop. A pattern of credit card charges, a hotel in Hendersonville in early May, a restaurant downtown on a night she'd told me she was home late from a team dinner. That, when I checked, no one else on her team seemed to remember attending, based on an offhand comment from her coworker Priya at a barbecue we went to that weekend. Priya. That was a red herring. For a while, I actually suspected, briefly, that Priya knew everything and was covering for Rachel, given how carefully she changed the subject whenever the agency came up. It took me 2 more weeks to realize Priya didn't know anything at all. She was just uncomfortable because she and Rachel had been arguing over an unrelated project dispute, and any mention of work made her retreat. Not every uncomfortable silence in this story meant what I assumed it meant. I want to be honest about that, because for a while I built an entire secondary suspicion around the wrong person, and it cost me time and clarity I didn't get back. The real thread led somewhere else entirely. To a Venmo account I found linked to an old email of Rachel's I didn't know she still used, an account she'd apparently opened specifically to route small payments to and from Marcus without them showing up on our shared banking app. Dinners. A hotel split 3 ways with something vague. It wasn't a lot of money. That wasn't the point. The point was the architecture of it, the careful, deliberate construction of a second financial life running parallel to our real one, built with the same kind of precision I use when I'm designing something meant to hold weight, without anyone noticing the load-bearing structure underneath. I remember sitting with that discovery for a long time, feeling something colder than anger. Anger would have been easier. What I felt was closer to awe, in the worst sense of the word. Awe at how much deliberate work it takes to hide a life inside a life. I hadn't been married to a woman who slipped once. I'd been married, for months, to a woman running two schedules, two emotional registers, two entire versions of honesty, and doing it well enough that I hadn't caught it until I started actually looking. That was the moment I understood something that would take me a long time to fully sit with. I hadn't been building a marriage for a while now. I'd been maintaining the appearance of one and telling myself that was the same thing. The bridges I build for a living have to hold real weight, calculated to the pound, tested against failure. I'd been living inside a marriage I hadn't stress-tested in years, assuming it would hold simply because it always had. There was a night in early June. I remember it specifically because it was Emma's last day of first grade, where Rachel came home glowing, genuinely happy in a way that had nothing to do with our daughter finishing the school year. And something in me went very quiet and very still. I sat at the dinner table, watching her laugh at something Emma said, watching her reach over and squeeze my hand the way she used to, and I thought, she doesn't know that I know. And underneath that thought, something colder, I don't know if I want her to know yet. I want to stop here because I think some of you have lived inside a version of this. The strange, suspended feeling of loving someone and gathering evidence against them in the same week, in the same house, sometimes in the same hour. It doesn't feel like hatred. It feels like grief that hasn't been allowed to start yet, because you're still working, still calculating, still not ready to let the weight down. By the third week of June, I had 47 screenshots, calendar entries, photos, Venmo transactions, a hotel receipt I'd found folded into the lining of a jacket pocket, of all places, when I was taking her coat to the dry cleaner. A detail so mundane it almost felt like the universe was mocking me, handing me the final piece of proof inside a coat pocket on an ordinary Tuesday. I didn't confront her that week either. I waited 3 more days, not out of hesitation, but because I wanted to be sure of the timeline, sure of the pattern, sure that when I finally said something, there would be nothing left for her to talk her way around. That Friday, Emma was staying at my sister's for a sleepover. The house was quiet in a way it almost never was. Rachel came home from what her calendar called a team happy hour, smelling faintly of a cologne that wasn't mine, and I sat her down at the kitchen table, the same island where, 3 months earlier, I'd first seen Marcus's name glow blue on her screen and told myself it was nothing. It was not nothing, and I was done pretending otherwise. I didn't raise my voice. I want to say that clearly, because I think people expect this part to be loud, and it wasn't. I opened my laptop on the kitchen table, screen facing her, and I said, I need you to look at something. Rachel's face did a complicated thing, surprise, then confusion, then something harder settling underneath both of those as she scanned the first screenshot. What is this? 47 of them, I said. I counted. I laid them out the way I'd have laid out load calculations for a client, one at a time, in order, without embellishment. The calendar entries, the rooftop bar photo, the Venmo transfers, the hotel in Hendersonville. I kept my voice level. I didn't accuse. I just said, each time, here's what I have, here's the date, explain it to me. This is insane, Rachel said, pushing the laptop an inch away from her, not far enough to close it. You've been going through my phone? My photos? Do you understand how violated that makes me feel? Explain the hotel receipt, I said. It's not what it looks like. Her voice had gone tight, controlled. That was a work retreat. Half the creative team stayed there. Priya wasn't at a work retreat that weekend. I asked her, weeks ago, without knowing why I was asking. She said the team hadn't done anything together since March. Rachel's jaw shifted. You've been interrogating my coworkers? I've been trying to understand why my wife has a second Venmo account. She went quiet for a moment, and I watched something recalibrate behind her eyes. Not the collapse of someone caught, but the visible work of someone building a new wall in real time. It's really not what it looks like, Daniel. Marcus and I are close, yes. We work incredibly closely on high-pressure accounts. That's it. You're taking normal work closeness and turning it into something ugly because you've clearly been unhappy for a long time and you're looking for something to blame. I laid down the rooftop photo again, the one with her hand on his forearm, Her head tilted toward his in a way I recognized because I remembered her tilting her head toward me exactly like that, once, a long time ago. This isn't work closeness. That's one photo out of context. I have 46 more. She stood up from the table, arms crossed, and for a moment I thought she might simply leave the room. Instead, she turned and said, quieter now, fine. Fine. Okay, it wasn't nothing. But it was never serious. It was stupid. It was a mistake. It happened once or twice, and it meant nothing. And you're acting like I destroyed our entire life over something that barely happened. The Venmo account has 9 months of transactions. Something in her face flickered, the minimization cracking slightly under a detail she hadn't accounted for me having. It wasn't 9 months of, Daniel, it wasn't constant, it wasn't some big affair, it was messy and it was wrong and I hate that it happened, but you're building this into something bigger than it was. I sat back in my chair and looked at her, really looked at her, the way I hadn't let myself in months, and I said, I'm not building anything. I have receipts. I have dates. I have a hotel room in Hendersonville and a phone case our 7-year-old noticed before I let myself notice anything. I'm not asking you to confirm a theory, Rachel. I'm asking you to stop editing the truth in real time while I'm sitting right here holding the whole thing. That landed somewhere. I watched it land. Her arms uncrossed slowly, and something in her posture gave way. Not collapse, not yet, but the visible cost of holding the minimization up against 47 pieces of evidence that didn't leave room for it anymore. You want the truth, she said finally, quietly, sitting back down across from me. Okay, you want it. I'll give it to you. All of it. She finally spoke. This is what she told me. It started in April at the Kessler pitch. We were working late, and he made me laugh, really laugh, for the first time in longer than I want to admit. I remember driving home that night thinking I'd forgotten what it felt like to be interesting to someone, not just useful. Not somebody's wife, somebody's mom, somebody managing a household. A whole person. I told myself I was allowed to feel that once and let it go. I didn't let it go. I told myself, every single time, that it would be the last time. The first dinner that turned into something more, I told myself it was just stress, just a bad week, and it wouldn't happen again. Then it happened again. And I built this whole justification in my head, that as long as I was still here, still doing pickup and drop-off, still making Emma's lunches, none of it counted as really leaving anything. I told myself I could hold both lives at once if I was careful enough. I was terrified constantly. Terrified you'd find out. Terrified of what it would do to Emma. Terrified of who I was becoming and unable to stop becoming her anyway. There were nights I'd come home and stand in the kitchen and look at Emma's drawings on the fridge, and I couldn't look at them straight on. I'd have to look past them, at the wall behind them, because looking directly at her handwriting made something in my chest cave in. I tried to stop it twice. Once in May, I told Marcus it was over, and I meant it for about 11 days. The second time, right before you found the coat pocket receipt, I'd already decided I was going to end it for real this time, tell you everything, and try to fix what I'd broken. I didn't get the chance to do it on my own terms. You found it first. The room was very quiet after that. I sat with what she'd said, feeling something in my chest that wasn't quite anger anymore and wasn't quite grief either. Something in between, heavier than both. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I gathered the screenshots back into a folder, closed the laptop, and said, I need you to understand something. I'm not interested in the version where this was small. I have the receipts. I know exactly how big it was. She reached for my hand across the table. I didn't pull away, but I didn't hold on either. My hand just sat there, under hers, neither accepting nor refusing, and I think that told both of us more than anything I could have said out loud. Rachel moved into her sister's place 2 weeks later. Not because I demanded it, because once the minimization stopped working, once the full shape of it was sitting on the table between us and black and white timestamps, there was nothing left to argue toward. We told Emma, together, as gently as two broken people can manage, that Mommy needed her own space for a while. Emma cried. Then she asked if Biscuit could sleep in her room that night, and I said yes. And something about the simplicity of that request, a 7-year-old's whole grief translated into wanting the dog closer, undid me more than anything else had in 6 weeks. Marcus's own life didn't stay intact either. His wife, I learned later through the strange, small-town machinery of Asheville's professional circles, had found her own version of the truth around the same time. A mutual friend who worked at the agency mentioned, months later at a chance run-in at the grocery store, that Marcus had moved out of his own house that same summer, that his marriage hadn't survived the fallout any better than mine had. I felt nothing like satisfaction hearing it. I felt something closer to recognition, the understanding that whatever he and Rachel had built together had never been built to hold real weight either. It collapsed on its own timeline, the way anything built without honesty eventually does. Rachel asked, twice, over the following months, if there was any chance of us trying again. I listened both times. I didn't slam a door on her. That's not who I am, and it never was. What I told her, the second time, sitting in a coffee shop downtown while Emma was at a friend's birthday party, was the truest thing I had. That I didn't hate her, that I understood more about why it happened than I wished I did, and that understanding it didn't make me able to unknow it. I told her I'd spent 9 years being good at exactly the wrong things, at not asking, at keeping the peace, at making everything look fine from the outside long after it had stopped being fine on the inside, and that I wasn't going to keep doing that, not even to save something I used to want more than almost anything. She nodded. She didn't argue. I think, by then, she understood it too. We share custody now. Emma splits her weeks between us, and on the nights she's with me, she still asks Biscuit to sleep in her room, and I still say yes every time. I don't know if I'd call where I ended up happy, exactly, but I know I'm no longer the man sitting in his truck in a parking garage, holding a feeling he wouldn't name. I know what happened, all 47 pieces of it, and I know I didn't flinch away from any of it once I decided to look. There's a version of this story where I'm the villain for gathering evidence instead of confronting her the moment I noticed the flipped phone. I've turned that over more than once. But I think the real mistake wasn't the 6 weeks I spent quietly building a folder of proof. It was the months before that, the ones where I noticed everything and said nothing, where a 7-year-old picked up more truth from a phone case than I let myself acknowledge from 100 smaller signals. The red flags were never subtle. The gas station receipt 40 minutes from her office. The flinch when I picked up her phone. The new intensity at the gym that had nothing to do with fitness and everything to do with wanting to feel seen by someone who wasn't me. I saw every one of them in real time and translated each one into something survivable, because survivable felt safer than true. The lesson I keep coming back to isn't really about infidelity at all. It's about the cost of silence dressed up as patience. I used to think staying calm, not pushing, giving her space, was a kind of strength. I understand now that it was often just fear wearing a more respectable name. Trust isn't the absence of doubt. It's what you do with doubt when it shows up. I let mine sit for months instead of speaking it out loud, and by the time I finally did, the damage had already finished happening. All that was left was documenting it. Rachel's mistake was different but connected to the same root. She didn't fall into the affair because she stopped loving me, or Emma, or the life we'd built. She fell into it because somewhere along the way she stopped feeling like a whole person inside that life. And instead of saying that plainly, at a kitchen table, on an ordinary Tuesday, she went looking for the feeling somewhere it was never going to be sustainable. Neither of us said the true, uncomfortable thing when it would have mattered. We both chose the version of honesty that cost less in the moment and more in the end. What hurts most, even now, isn't the screenshots or the hotel receipt or the second Venmo account. It's the ordinary things. Emma's phone case comment at the dinner table, the way Rachel used to fall asleep with her hand flat on my chest before she stopped. Those are the details that stayed with me longer than any piece of evidence, because they're the ones that were never about proof. They were just about two people slowly stopping the small, daily work of choosing each other, long before either of us said it out loud. I don't know if you're sitting in your own version of that kitchen right now, holding a feeling you haven't named yet, telling yourself it's nothing. I hope, if you are, you don't wait as long as I did to look directly at it. Some doors close quietly, long before anyone admits out loud that they're closed. If any of this found something true in you, a person who let you down, a moment you noticed and looked away from anyway, I'd genuinely like to know. Drop one word in the comments that describes it. And thank you, sincerely, for sitting with this one all the way through. It wasn't an easy story to tell, but it was easier telling it to you than it ever was living it alone.